Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books author reading series. If you'd like to learn more about us and our many upcoming author events, please visit skylightbooks.com, where you can browse our inventory, buy books, and join our Friends with Benefits Club. You can also follow us on Twitter, Tumblr, and Facebook. To speak to a real live bookseller like me, please call 323-660-1175. Thanks for your support, and enjoy.
Today, of course, we are absolutely delighted to have Onnesha Roychoudhuri, Marginalized Majority, Claiming Our Power in a Post-Truth America with Jenny Yang. Jenny Yang is a comedian, writer, actor, and President Obama's 2016 honoree as a White House champion for change for her leadership and storytelling. I was impressed. Onnesha Roychoudhuri is a writer and educator, a two-time Pushcart Prize nominee, whose work appears in N+1, The Nation, Mother Jones, Salon, Rolling Stone, and elsewhere. But this is her first nonfiction book. My goodness, has it gotten so well received. It's put out by Melville House, so it's also like such a good publishing house, and it's such a beautiful book just as a physical object. But the reviews have called it daring, witty, delightfully personal, powerful, progressive, timely, deep, fresh, clear-eyed, bold, vital, stirring, conversational, heartfelt, persuasive, engaging, compelling, and brilliant. Please give her a round of applause.
I feel like I'm blushing now. Hi guys, thanks for coming out. This is my last stop on a tour here, so I'm tired, but full of lots of warm, fuzzy feelings, and it's nice to see some familiar faces in the audience too. Thanks for coming out. So I'm just going to start off by doing a little reading, a few excerpts from the book, and then I will hop into some conversation with the delightful Jenny Yang, who is Obama's favorite person, and then we'll open up for a few questions, and then do the whole book signing thing. If you have a book that you want to buy, like this one that you want me to sign, I'll also just sign other books. In case you have other books you want me to sign. So I'll just start off by reading from, let's see, a section called Default Objectivity. In grad school, I took a literature class with a focus on colonialism. My professor, Gitanjali Shahani, was always bringing primary resources to class, often jaw-dropping early texts from the British Empire. One text in particular stood out: Board's Illustrated Guide to People, published in 1542, during the nascent days of British empire building. At the start of the first chapter is an image of a white male in his skivvies, armed with a pair of scissors. These, the author notes, were for the Englishmen to make clothing from the fabrics of the world. Included at the front was a poem describing the guide's conceit. I am an Englishman, and naked I stand here, musing in my mind what raiment I shall wear. For now I will wear this, and now I will wear that. Now I will wear I cannot tell what. All new fashions be pleasant to me. I do fear no man, all men feareth me. I overcome my adversaries by land and by sea. The idea was that being a white male subject of the British Empire offered the privilege of neutrality. You could try on the ethnicities of the world, becoming a dark-skinned Moor with great lips and knotted hair, or a light-fingered Egyptian. You could try on something else, because you were a blank canvas. You could become and do whatever you pleased because, as a white man, you were invested with no other innate qualities, except, of course, supremacy over anyone who was not a white man. I was reminded of Board's guide when Justice Sonia Sotomayor was going through the Supreme Court confirmation process in 2009. She had come under fire for stating that being a woman and Latina influenced her perspective. I think the system is strengthened when judges don't assume they're impartial, she testified, but rather when judges test themselves to identify when their emotions or their experiences are driving their results. Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama, now the U.S. Attorney General, agitatedly adjusted his glasses and responded, "Aren't you saying that you expect your background and heritage to influence your decision-making? You accept that there may be sympathies, prejudices, and opinions that legitimately can influence a judge's decision?" Sessions remarked, "I reject such a view, and Americans reject such a view." I was troubled by that slippery slope between I and Americans that Sessions had traveled in a single breath. I mulled it over for days before I recognized why the statement had lodged itself like a splinter beneath my skin. Implicit in Sessions' reaction was a presumption that his perspective was objective and American in a way that Sotomayor's perspective was not. How impossible a situation. You are raised in a country where you're socialized differently, treated as other, and then chastised for acknowledging this fact. And how odd that acknowledging that human beings are not inherently objective, that their perspectives are shaped by their experiences of the world, is so objectionable to Sessions. Here, Sotomayor was articulating the real work of approaching neutrality and objectivity. She was acknowledging her experiences and examining their impact on her perspective in order to test herself. This is the same kind of work required of any human being who strives toward self-awareness and self-knowledge. Sessions' response perfectly encompasses white privilege. The presumption that your subjective way of being in and seeing the world constitutes a uniquely objective perspective. We cannot discuss our received notions of objectivity without recognizing that they are commonly located in this default white male perspective. What we tend to think of as objectivity is actually a very particular subjectivity run amok. And there's a little footnote here that I will read. Sessions is also a vehement opponent of affirmative action, which strikes me as a powerful irony. The reality we live in is, by default, a robust affirmative action program for white men. Like most Americans, I was raised to be a white man. I read William Faulkner and Ernest Hemingway. I read F. Scott Fitzgerald and Charles Bukowski. I came to identify with the emotionally disengaged characters, the staccato sentences, the irreverent dirty old man voice. The books I read asked me to imagine the power I might have. I got women pregnant and then worried that they wouldn't get an abortion, tied me down forever when all I wanted to do was continue experiencing my freedom. I wrote poems about the absurdity of writing poems, enjoying the decadence of imagining my readers drinking in my disregard for them. Being likable, explaining oneself to others, these were not prerequisites of protagonism. I watched women move, their hips in dresses, their lips on glasses, their breasts heaving, all of it offered up to me, to enjoy, to consume. The fact that I was a brown woman was not something that seemed immediately relevant when I was younger. I moved through the world with the sense that I would have access to the same kind of power as the protagonists of the books I read and the movies I watched. Of course we all identify with white protagonists. They're almost always the heroes, the ones with the power to change things, to affect things rather than simply be affected. As James Baldwin put it, you go to white movies and like everybody else, you fall in love with Joan Crawford and you root for the good guys who are killing off the Indians. It comes as a great psychological collision when you realize all of these things are really metaphors for your oppression and will lead into a kind of psychological warfare in which you may perish. And whether it be because you are female, brown, queer, or in any other way visibly other from white, able-bodied, cisgender, heterosexual men, there's gotta be a quick way to say that. It feels like a kind of violence when you suddenly have to reckon with the differences of the body you're in. Coming of age, in particular, constitutes a jarring emergence of double consciousness, of being forced to see yourself through the eyes of others, even as you're still trying to form a sense of self. During a summer trip to Florida to visit relatives, my aunt, poolside, remarked upon my 14-year-old form in a bathing suit. "When did you get breasts? How big are those things?" I felt ashamed, and not just because my body was suddenly a spectacle. I already knew it was. How big are those things was precisely how I felt about the strange lumps of flesh that had sprouted from my body. They were separate from me. While I was deeply embarrassed by my aunt's commentary, there was an element of identification, of relating to her perspective. It seemed more of a farce to me that people could look at me and assume that this newly hatched female form was somehow me instead of something that had happened to me. And yet that is the presumption, that the general shape you come to take imbues you with certain female traits, to be accommodating, empathetic, emotional, sexual, but not too sexual. Our bodies become shorthand for a grab bag of assumptions, some of which we grow into, some of which we bristle against. My femaleness has always been something that seemed to fit me poorly, at turns an oversized garment I could not fill, or some skimpy rag out of which I spilled. Though I've already made a mistake by calling the femaleness mine, it's never felt like a thing I owned, so much as a general shape I grew into that seemed to offer me up for public consumption. The phrase, gender is a construct, might strike some as academic claptrap, but ask any woman how they were treated before and after puberty, and you're well on your way to understanding not just the truth, but how fucked up that truth is. The extent to which the entire world and the way you must navigate it is irrevocably changed. Also at 14, I remember walking down the street with Kay and H, my closest friends, in the North Carolina college town where I grew up. We flinched when 3 men started catcalling us. "Yeah, baby, look at that ass." I remember feeling bewildered and disarmed, and having a reputation as being the outspoken one, I felt vaguely responsible for doing something about it. But I did nothing. One of the most humiliating aspects of that moment was that in doing nothing, it felt like I had allowed them to do something to us. This is one of the most nefarious aspects of predatory behavior. It makes the target of the behavior feel complicit. You might be going about your business, and then someone who has more power than you demands engagement, the kind in which even your refusal does not always free you from, forcing you to play a part in a scene you had no interest in even auditioning for. A couple hours after the encounter with those men, my friends and I piled back into the car and started our drive home. That's when I spotted the men, still roving the sidewalk not far from where we'd encountered them. "Wait," I told H, who was driving, "slow down." I rolled down the window, started shouting at them the very same things they had lobbed at us. "Yeah, baby, look at that ass." It was a humbling and educational moment because, of course, they loved it. I was startled in my naivete. I had turned the tables, but the tables had not turned. I didn't have the language for it then, but this was one of the first times I experienced how my words would always be shaped by my appearance, how they would often be heard differently, how they would often weigh less, how the expectations of my femaleness would become a thing I would repeatedly have to explain, justify, respond to, contradict. Now I'm going to read from a section called On Complicity. After the election, my friend T told me her story about watching the Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas hearings. In 1991, Hill testified that Clarence Thomas had sexually harassed her while he was her supervisor at the Department of Education and Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. She said that Thomas had asked her out repeatedly and that when she said no, he continually discussed sexual topics with her in the workplace. Watching the televised hearings, T told me, gave her a strange sense of vertigo. So much of the behavior that Hill was describing was what she had experienced years back, when she had been working for a man who served as her mentor. He often made overtures that made her uncomfortable, turning the conversation to sexual topics, glancing at her body. But she still valued his experience and his guidance, so she found ways to live with it, minimize it. It never went too far, she said. But still, she was seeing the behavior differently in retrospect. While watching the hearings one day, she got a phone call from that same mentor. She hadn't heard from him in years. He was watching the hearings too, he said. He wanted to know whether what Thomas did to Hill was what he had done to her. This was the point at which T paused her story. She looked at me and shook her head in disbelief. "You know what I did?" she asked. "I told him no. I told him it was fine. I reassured him." I've marched alongside T at a number of protests. I've seen her defend and advance the rights and voices of teenagers in the foster care and juvenile justice systems. As someone who is fiercely progressive and politically engaged, T struggled, as so many of us do, to understand how she could minimize her experience in that way. It's notable that 53% of white women voted for Trump, a professed sexual predator. What does it mean that these women either decided his behavior was reasonable, or that they somehow thought that this personal aspect of his life was separate from his politics? Gloria Steinem, in her memoir, My Life on the Road, writes about how she tried to dissociate herself from her mother when she was younger, because she saw her mother as passive, meek, having struggled with mental illness, and given up a career as a journalist to raise a family. It was a stance she came to revise when she discovered, quote, that we were alike in many ways, something I either hadn't seen or couldn't admit out of fear that I would share her fate. It's a denial so many of us can relate to. We want to believe we aren't subject to the same forces that limit others' lives. We want to feel we're free to be and do anything we choose. Sometimes we become so attached to this heady narrative that we'll throw our true allies, and even ourselves, under the bus. It's frighteningly easy for so many of us in this country to empathize with those who abuse their power. After all, we all grow up to be straight white men until we're forced to recognize that we aren't. It's a tension evident in the fact that Time's 2017 Person of the Year was the silence breakers, all the women who had come forward about being sexually assaulted or harassed. The runner-up for the honor? President Trump. What better evidence of how we're wrestling with what power means and where it resides? And because we should close on a hopeful note, I'm going to read from a section towards the end called Taking Back Our Narratives. I regularly teach storytelling to high school students. After a few weeks of brainstorming and practicing, they each perform a story from their lives in front of classmates and friends. It's instructive to see teenagers navigate balancing the truth of their stories with the awareness of how that truth might be received by their peers. One young woman that I worked with wanted to tell a story of self-acceptance, of recognizing that she was more introverted than some of her friends, and making peace with that realization. An important part of her story was relating the experience of losing a friend of hers to suicide, a friend who had gone to the same school she was currently attending. During dress rehearsal, she hesitated midway through her story, right when she began to describe her close relationship with a friend she had lost. I thought at first it was too emotional for her and reminded her that she only needed to tell the parts of the story that she felt comfortable sharing. She bowed her head and quietly came over to talk to me. I'm afraid they won't believe me, she said, her brows knitted in concern. Well, what won't they believe, I asked. That that's what he was like, that that's what our relationship was like. She was afraid, in other words, that her narrative would not be accepted because it wouldn't be recognizable to anyone else. I told her that this was precisely the beauty of her perspective. There is no objective version. Indeed, the only reason her story existed is because it was rooted in her subjectivity and experience. This perspective was a gift, a thread that added to the memories that other people had of that same friend, created a stronger tapestry, a truer representative likeness of who her friend was. There is a magic to focusing less on responding to expectations. It breaks a spell, which is perhaps simply the myth that we should all fall into one or two particular categories, that our lives and stories must fit a mold in order to be legible to others. But it's the specificity of our identities and experiences that command the ears and hearts of each other. Human beings are incredible bullshit detectors, and listening to someone try to tell a story or truth that is not their own often strikes us on a gut level. Watching that young woman take the stage and tell her story was an experience that drove home how powerful we are when we fully inhabit our stories and ourselves. She was soft-spoken at the microphone, which only motivated everyone in the audience to lean in, their bodies listing towards her. Apart from her voice, the silence in the room was absolute. We were all under the spell, watching her claim the role of protagonist in her own story. Like that young woman hesitating to tell her story, we learn early on to adapt our narratives based on the people in the room. How much of myself can I share? At what point will what I share become ammunition used against me? So we soften our particularities, and as soon as we do, we give something up. Watching that young woman perform, I was reminded of the way James Baldwin struggled, on the page and in real life, with this question of how to push past expectations to reclaim yourself and story. In a 1961 interview, Baldwin tells Studs Terkel, "All you are ever told in this country about being black is that it is a terrible, terrible thing to be. Now, in order to survive this, you have to really dig down into yourself and recreate yourself, really according to no image which yet exists in America. You have to impose, in fact, this may sound very strange, you have to decide who you are and force the world to deal with you, not with its idea of you." Part of what I've always loved about Baldwin is his ongoing commitment to complicating the conversation about the race debate. There are times where, listening to recordings of him debating folks, I've wondered at the way he seems to meander so far beyond the terms of the question at hand, yet keep you utterly transfixed. In his 1965 debate with Buckley, Baldwin is asked, "Is the American dream at the expense of the American Negro?" Baldwin opens by reframing the terms, referring to the question as, quote, "hideously loaded," and that one's reaction to that question has to depend on where you find yourself in the world, what your sense of reality is. He then pivots, saying, I have to speak as one of the people who have been most attacked by what we must now here call the Western or the European system of reality. What you're watching is Baldwin repeatedly refusing the narrative in the question as it's constructed. He refuses to abstract his personal experience, to strip his narrative so that it would be more objective or palatable, in line with the way Buckley would like to discuss the politics of the Negro question. He understands that there is no politics without the person, and that it was the fact of his complex selfhood that was already inherently the most political prospect on the table. Here, then, is a model for how to push back. By surfacing missing narratives that give us a history that more accurately captures our power. By digging more deeply into our own narratives and reclaiming the complexity of them. By no longer walking the tightrope of fulfilling expectations. By refusing the single reductive option offered us and demanding another one entirely. By acknowledging the realities of the world we're in and in the same breath, insisting that another one is not only possible, but necessary. And I'll stop there.
Okay, I'm going to adjust the little camera here now. That was awesome. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I love that you also highlighted a bunch of the sort of more personal stories.
Yeah.
Right? What I love about this book, I'm just going to tell you, I love this book. I think every single person needs to buy it and read it and share it and gift it, because I'll be honest, I needed to read it. I really did, because it was such a great combination of your personal experiences, but woven into exactly what is happening in our country right now, and in a way that you bring in the facts, but it's not too heavy with the facts, and it's just nice. It's just right. You know what I'm saying? I'll tell you
it's a good beach read, guys.
You know,
that's what she's trying to say.
Basically. No, it's very readable, because I'll tell you this. Other than the fact that I needed to read it for tonight, because I did want to, because I want to like engage on the topics that you're talking about, after 2016, this is, I don't know, I mean, you all are book people, right? Total book people. Every problem I have in my life, I have like 5 books that I bought for it, right? You're like, oh God, what do I do? You're like, maybe there's a book, you know? And what I did was, after the 2016 election, I was like, what do I need to do? And I remember like looking at all the books. You know, I bought the Hillary book, the one that was like talking about what happened with the campaign and blah, 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 right? I did not touch that thing. I'm like, wait, we just lived it. I don't want to relive this bullshit with all the technicalities involved. No, this is not enjoyable. I am hurting, you know. I bought myself a $65 life-size teddy bear. That's literally what I did after the elections, you know. And so I think it's in that context for me, as someone who loves books and who has like a bunch of books that I've started and maybe haven't finished, that made this book and this read especially helpful, I think, for me right now. You know, and I think we were talking earlier, I just wanted to start by talking about sort of how this book is helping me, because why not? Personal is political. Anyway, well, I'm not making fun of that, I mean it. But I'm a stand-up comedian. I was formerly in the labor movement, and I left because I burnt out, and you know, the succubus that is politics drained me of my 20-something energy, and I decided I would answer my calling to be more creative, and that turned into being a writer and a stand-up comedian. And I also make digital videos, so whatever, you could look it up. But last year,
they're funny.
I would say 2017, I had all these plans, y'all. I had all these plans. I was like, oh my gosh, I just bought my equipment, you know, to make my own videos. 2017, I'm gonna like make a bunch of funny videos that are also really relevant. And then, you know, the elections happened. So 2017, literally, I made 0 of my own videos. Like, and I am like a recovering overachiever. Like, I still did a lot of stuff. Angela can attest. I still did a lot of stuff. I just didn't make videos. There's a place in me that wanted to create, that wanted to make something, that just couldn't do it, you know, because I was still reeling from understanding what was happening around us and what role we needed to play. And I think that's, so 2018 happened, and I was like, you know what?
Trump took enough of my joy. I'm just gonna come out, gangbusters fight. I'm just gonna make videos. So I did. But there is still a part of me that still wonders, what role do I need to play as a comedian or an artist, and just as a person, right? We all marched. That's great, right? But I think I wonder what will it really take for us to shift things. And what I appreciate about your book is that it's so readable, which is not to say it's not dense with content. It's so readable because it helped me to give me a little bit of that distance and perspective that I think I needed to weave all of these things together, which is what you really do. I love that you bring together, I think if I could say what I think the main thesis is, right? So the idea is the marginalized majority means we are in the majority and we need to claim that, right? That we are not, we shouldn't be playing the defense by thinking that it is still this narrative of whatever, the white working class or whatever is the dominant narrative, that in fact, America's values and needs, we hold them in us as the marginalized majority. I think that's a very powerful concept. And I think, amongst my friends and colleagues, we would talk about that. But I love that you really crystallize that in this book, and you kind of break down why that is true, and therefore what we need to do. And so what I really appreciated was being reminded as someone who used to be a professional activist, and you could argue maybe I am, but I don't even, I'm a comedian. But when I used to be a professional activist, that's all we talked about. Organizing is a methodology, in labor organizing or community organizing, right? Some of you who are familiar, it is like a science. And I love that you reminded me that, in fact, we need to undo the narratives that we have been told around what it takes to make change.
Yeah, I mean, the point is that a lot of the narratives that we've been fed immediately after the election are terrifying, right? It's like America's never been more divided, we're screwed, and I think you're saying like this is the book that you needed. I feel like I wrote the book that I also needed. I mean, like the book is sort of my journey through being terrified, but what I was more terrified of was, again, seeing these these are common narratives that are perpetuated all the time in moments of political crisis. And my own journey as a progressive journalist, I kind of saw some of this happening during the 8 years of Bush 2. And so when Trump came around, I was like, I don't want us to, because what happened then is I saw a lot of friends and colleagues really kind of push back on their heels and feeling defensive and like, well, we just got to wait this thing out. And what happened in the wake of the election is that I was terrified, obviously, for a variety of reasons, but one of the things that scared me more than what Trump was going to do and what he was doing was the notion that the people who need to stand up and fight the most were already kind of counting themselves out and wanting to bury their heads in the sand. And so that's what kind of got me going down this path. Because in reality, like when I started doing the research, this notion that we're more divided than ever before, again, predicated on, it's just totally false, right? Like if you look at, obviously there's just the fact of Hillary Clinton got a lot more votes, but that aside, when you look at the core issues that the majority of Americans are concerned about, whether it's access to education, healthcare, really common basic things, vast majority of Americans want these things.
Yeah.
So in reality, I was like, yeah, we've never been more divided, but the divide is not between each other as the most notable problematic divide. The divide is between what the majority of Americans want and what the handful of extremists who have power right now are offering.
In political leadership.
Yeah, and it's like, when you look at it that way, I was like, oh, this is a completely different reality. This is a reality in which if we recognize that and push forward, it's a matter of time before that handful of extremists, and it's going to take work, right? But it's much less terrifying and disempowering as kind of the narratives we were constantly being fed.
Yeah.
One of which was also that protest is pointless.
Yeah, and I love that too, is that you brought in some examples of social movements, right? Like the civil rights movement and other things that remind us that in fact it was those things that made change happen. Mm-hmm. Like, I love the example of Rosa Parks. I mean, I feel like if you talk, in sort of how do people get activated? Rosa Parks is a great example of that that you mentioned, which is people just thought she was some old lady who just got tired, when she was in her 40s, number one, for some reason, people want to make
so weird.
Black women tired and old.
Well, they just can't tell how old Black people are. So like, she's, I don't know, 50,
she could be 20, she could be 80, who knows? Yeah, so, you know, she was in her 40s. She was long trained.
Yeah, member of the NAACP.
Yeah, with nonviolent organizing. And she was chosen, in fact, because she knew that she, as a person and symbolically, would be a good, you know, kind of linchpin for what was supposed to happen, which is say, this is not right. How are you going to let a nice lady not sit in the front? You know?
Yeah, totally. And the way we get it, the way we receive that narrative generally in textbooks is like, you know, Rosa Parks, she was this grandmotherly figure, and like she was tired, and then all of a sudden everyone was like, oh wait, we should probably let everyone ride the buses no matter what. Yeah, you know. It kind of, because we collapse it and make it a two-dimensional story, erasing the fact that this was the kind of activism that was being engaged in by a variety of Americans. There were so many Americans and Black Americans who did the same thing as Rosa Parks and were arrested, and that never made headlines. Yeah. But that doesn't mean, and this is what I unpack in the book too, it doesn't mean that those weren't successful, quote unquote, or that they were failures, right? Yeah. It's just that the way that we tend to talk about protest is that if it doesn't lead immediately to some kind of change, then we're like, well, that was a waste of time, you know? Totally. And it's just kind of this deep-seated, knee-jerk reaction we have towards protest. But again, like the fact that we all think of like civil rights movement, yeah, that needed to happen. It was inevitable, an important, you know, move towards real equality. But at the time, the people who were protesting, the people who were freedom riders, the people doing the lunch counter sit-ins, they were not that popular. No. They did not have majority support in America. And we see the same kind of thing today, whether it's Occupy Wall Street or Black Lives Matter. The percentages are a little higher in terms of support, but it's still not a majority in terms of people who are supporting these explicit protest movements. So my hope is that, you know, learning this kind of history, resurfacing these kinds of narratives and understanding that we're not kind of getting the full picture will hopefully enable us to be like, hey, maybe we can cut that window of time between like not understanding how important this is and being like, yeah, that's really important. We can like shrink it to like very little time. Yeah.
No, I mean, I feel like we see that today, right? That, you know, here in Los Angeles especially, whenever there's a protest that blocks a freeway, oh, God forbid, freeway exit got blocked. You hear people commenting online, your friends are like, I mean, I'm totally supportive, but like, not during rush hour. You know, like, that's like usually what you hear, and it's like, well, no, duh, that's also the point, right? But this idea that, oh, it's just so inconvenient protest, but like it's like baked into what it is, and that we have this like, it's like this idea that we're like all of a sudden everyone's like, oh yeah, we agree the civil rights movement's good, right? Yeah. But back then they were like, no, this was annoying. Who is this lady keeping my?
Why are you so impatient?
Why are you so impatient? But you know, I feel like the analogy is like, you know. Like in high school, just to be petty, you're like, there's just one guy that like you thought no one liked, and then like all of a sudden the popular girl decided to take him out to homecoming, and you're like, oh my god, he's been cute the whole time. That's how it feels. Anyway, no.
Yeah,
we'll try that analogy another time. We'll find another analogy.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that was useful for me when I was researching this book, and also just like thinking about protests more generally, is there are kind of two general types of protest or action, and one is expressive and one is instrumental. So instrumental is usually, you know, like, we're protesting or doing this action because we want you to overturn this law or something very specific, right? But then expressive encompasses something more broad. That can be an action that helps solidify, the Women's March is a great example of an expressive action where, you know, there was obviously a variety of demands. There wasn't one clear call for something specific, but it was an unprecedented number of people in the streets around the world who were looking at each other and finding solace and solidarity. And I think the problem is that, especially in this country, there's a lot of, we're so fixated on the instrumental actions that we lose sight of the fact that expressive actions, and often the two go in tandem, but if anything that looks more like an expressive action, we're like, what a waste of time. And part of this, and I get into this in the book as well, is the way that a lot of news outlets cover protest erases the importance of those expressive actions. So, in the book I recount many headlines that literally before, during, and after the Women's March were like, why the Women's March has already failed before it happened, and why the Women's March is failing, and like, the Women's March failed. And it's like, at what, And something that got very little airtime is the fact that out of the Women's March, there were a number of people, women, who decided to run for political office and then unseated, in many cases, GOP incumbents. So I mean, there's not it's not always a clear cause and effect, and oftentimes it's like a sort of domino effect. But because the way we tend to think about the stories around protest as like, well, if it didn't go from X to Y within 2 weeks to 2 months, then it was pointless. What a waste of energy.
Yeah, I mean, so it's like, we need to, number one, tell better narratives and stories about who we are, but also what the reality is of what's happening on the ground, right? And I think it just, to me, that's the beginning of activism, or that's the beginning of organizing. It's not just a narrative. We have to tell the story that we are the majority. Otherwise, it feels really helpless. Like, why would I even act? Right? Yeah, and I think that's what's really powerful about reading your book, is that, like, you really break down all the instances where we could be doing better, honestly. And it also made me, I know you gave like a hopeful ending about what that means, but I think when I think about concrete takeaways from the book, I think about, we need to support independent media, right? There's ProPublica. Is that how you say Publica?
Yeah, ProPublica. Yeah.
Sorry. Sometimes I wonder if I'm over-ethnicizing like words.
I mean, it sounds sexy if you're like ProPublica.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just like the Spanish language.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just telling a quick story. A friend of mine was coming home from North Carolina, and their friend was like, "Oh my God, I really like this fried chicken place. It was called Bojangles."
No, that's what I jokingly call it, because I'm from North Carolina.
Oh, and they're like, "No,
I either call it Bojangles or Bojong."
Anyway, it's like, what? You mean Bojangles? Anyway, that was the friend over ethnic sizing.
It's amazing.
Anyway,
right. She's like, I want to make sure I'm getting this right.
So anyway, independent media, Publica, and then there's this idea around, like, what do we do in the face of mainstream media who just insists on covering a horse race and the judgment call around who wins or who loses? Example, Women's March. Like, what can we do other than tweet our asses off ourselves? Support independent journalism for sure. Yeah. And then, I think people are starting to understand that there's starting to be a more visible gap in terms of like the narratives that are offered to us, in terms of like following the people who are in power versus following what Americans are wanting. So obviously, all the polls in the lead up to the presidential election, it's like, whoops, right? But then this continues even today. So, in New York, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won, which was amazing. But again, we got this whole bevy of headlines that was just like, whoa, totally unexpected, total surprise. And it's not that surprising at all, because the fact is she was speaking very directly to what Americans are concerned about and what they want in a very unapologetic way. Yeah. And something that I like about that story as well about her win, is that she went on the Late Night Colbert show, and he was like, how do you explain it? Like, the polls had you weighed down. What's the deal? And she was like, oh, yeah, I can explain that. So here's the deal. The way that we do polling is usually we're looking at expected voters, rather than, and so she was like, well, yeah, so we didn't focus on expected voters. We got voters out who don't normally come out. Yep. And again, in terms of like the conceit of my book, which is that we're the marginalized majority, we are the majority. If you look at the numbers, and if you're really into numbers, there are plenty in here, but if you're super wonk and want a lot of graphs and charts, read Steve Phillips's Brown is the New White. And he breaks down how, like, just by the numbers, if we got out the vote and reached voters who aren't coming out, especially among more typically historically marginalized populations, we win. Easily win.
We just win.
Yeah, I mean, I was blown away by a couple of the numbers about how only about 30% of Americans were able to vote or something to that effect, like a third. Yeah. And then of that, whoever voted, and then of that, whoever voted for Hillary versus Trump, right? Yeah. So that's already not the majority. And then, God, what was the thing that you were just saying just now? I forgot it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. JK, I forgot.
Getting out the new voters. Getting out the people who
getting out the new voters.
Yeah.
Voter suppression.
Yeah, there's voter suppression. So we just have to talk about the real life needs, and it actually kind of works. I mean, honestly, right? Like she really just hit the ground.
Totally, yeah. And I've been heartened to see, but again, like every time someone like this runs, it keeps being discussed as though it's an aberration. You know, like I gotta look up her name. I wrote it down because I keep forgetting it for some reason. Oh yeah, Stacey Abrams, who's running for governor of Georgia.
Yes.
Total badass, amazing, and she's just like a black woman who's a fantastic storyteller and speaks honestly and like about her experience, and everyone's like, oh, this is so crazy that she's connecting even with white voters, you know? And it's, again, and a conceit that I talk about in the book a lot is that there's such a boogeyman of like identity politics as the thing that's going to divide us.
Yeah.
And especially among the left.
Yes.
Anytime there's a politically charged moment, there are like these people who crop up out of the woodwork. It's like they're just waiting for the moment to be like, identity, we must leave our identities behind.
What about class? What about class? Yes, Anne. Yes, Anne.
Yeah.
Can we do that? Can we hold two thoughts at the same time?
No, we already know that. It's hard. Yeah, it's bizarre. It's bizarre the way...
And this is someone who used to work in the labor movement. And then I talk about my like Asian American identity and immigrant identity all the time. It's like, it's okay. We can do all of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that dichotomy between race and class is so absurd, and also collapses the notion that like, well, first of all, you know, it's always like the white working class. We have to talk to the white working class.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, but the working class is majority people of color, so let's just start there. But also the white working class is not this monolithic entity. You know, like, why are we lumping them all together in this way and separating them out from the working class people of color, which is the most age-old divide to like try to drive a wedge into in terms of like people being nefarious in power. You know, like that's historically what's been done.
I feel like that's a lesson we're all learning right now in terms of talking about these multiple intersections, right? The concept of intersectionality. I wish there was fewer syllables to capture that concept that's more accessible, but that, you know, we...
Both and?
Yeah, that we can be both and.
Yeah.
And that, you know, you don't say this thing is for women and people of color.
Yeah.
But in fact, guess what? There's people of color who are women. And there are women who are people of color. And so there's these little things that we're kind of figuring out together, I think, in the age of social media, around how to talk about the sort of intersections of our multiple identities. Don't you think? I feel like those are the kind of conversations we're having. And it's hard. And it doesn't feel comfy. Like, I mean, I get like this argument around like, okay, in this moving forward, if we're the majority, how do we organize ourselves, right? And I think we have to confront these types of rhetorical and argumentative divides that like, people use to separate us.
We're so used to thinking of it as a conflict, that there's two sides to the story. And so I think we often come to the table already being like, well, I'm here defending, you know, women's rights, but what about class? And it's and I think what's really instructive is that when we look at protests and protest movements in history, they hinge on identity. You know, like when we talk about some of the most incredible and impactful change in this country, it is movements that are founded on identity that drew a variety of allies together. It wasn't just a single identity. And it's often queer women of color who, if you scrape beneath the surface of what we're seeing in textbooks, those are the people who are at the core of these movements, which I think, like, I kind of knew that, but when I was researching the book, it was like, oh, no, but really?
Yeah.
And, you know, obviously it's helpful to surface that history and learn that, but also just knowing that. It's like, oh, okay, so we should be, in terms of moving forward, we should be looking to these people who have been doing this work already and continue to be doing that work and join them, right? Be allies with them. And if we're at protests or we're at, you know, groups that are interested in taking part in actions and we aren't seeing diverse voices in the room, we know there's something wrong. You know? So, I mean, which isn't to say you should stop. It just means, like, who do we need to get into this room in order to really push forward for real substantive change?
Yeah, I think a great example of that is Black Lives Matter. You know, if you're familiar with sort of community and labor organizing down here in LA, the Bus Riders Union Strategy Center, they've been organizing here forever, right? Making sure that MTA doesn't raise, the monthly pass all the time, trying to make life more comfortable for working class folks. And, when Black Lives Matter happened, and some of you are on the internet, right? So you know that sometimes there's this sort of like condescending argument around hashtag politics, right? Like, oh, just because you have a hashtag doesn't mean you're doing something, right? And I remember when Black Lives Matter happened, and I saw who was behind it, I was like, oh, see? But because people were saying that about Black Lives Matter. But guess what? Black Lives Matter, the hashtag, was connected with on-the-ground people who have been organizing for decades. Yeah. Like Patrice, all the people that finally, yes, people got it right. And it was the women's magazines, honestly, who got it right. I'm trying to highlight who it was that really, led Black Lives Matter. There are these beautiful, pictorials of, Patrice and Alicia, and you're like, yes, these are the women who have been in the trenches organizing against police brutality, supporting working class folks of color, and then all of a sudden, yes, now that we have the tool of social media, so hashtag Black Lives Matter, but, I think we have such a deep education that we need to have. Of all the people who showed up at Women's March, can you imagine, which is, touched a lot more people who don't typically march, can you imagine if all of them got this level of sort of mass movement kind of change education, right? I mean, I feel like that's where we're at. We have to kind of do that, which makes me now feel like I have my marching orders as a stand-up comedian and a storyteller. Which, by the way, I have a bone to pick.
Go on.
If you read into the book, which you will, you do, at fair amount of length, talk about the role of comedians.
You do. It's true.
Now, I did get a little quick background on you that you have spent 3 years doing improv on a house team in New York at People's Improv Theater, whatever.
I don't do it anymore.
Why are you trying to like not accept your history?
No. It's not like I'm trying to hide my history. It's just that I don't want people to be like, oh, she's a comedian.
You tried stand up.
Why is she so not funny?
Listen, you already talked about you've already talked about white men. You're no longer eligible to be on the New York Times editorial board.
It is rough in the trenches. It is rough.
So what's my point? So basically, you highlight the fact that there's different types of ways comedians can make fun of things.
Yes.
Right? But in fact, there is a difference between true satire or parody and what you refer to as pastiche, which is a reference to another theorist, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, I don't know. I feel a little called out. But I feel a little defensive.
But see, Jenny, if you took a step back from being so quickly defensive, then you would give me an opportunity to say, I think you're doing the right kind of comedy.
What? Did you say what? Wait, what? Say that again.
Jenny, you're doing the right kind of comedy.
That made me feel better.
Yeah.
That's really all that was for.
And we're done. Thanks for coming out.
I just wanted to feel reassured that I was not doing things that were toothless. But
it's an analysis that I think is really important in comedy, because like the reality is that and the way that I look at it is exploring it through the lens of cynicism, right? So the earliest origin of the term cynicism is from ancient Greece, and it meant a radical truth-telling. It meant speaking the truth in the face of power no matter the odds, essentially. Now, when we think of cynicism, the way we practice it, it's like this savvy knowingness. It's like this attitude, this refusal to be surprised or shocked when people behave, especially in power, incredibly poorly. And my concern there is that then reinforces this sort of now we're at a point of rapid degradation of the system, right? So that someone like Trump, who's a reality TV star, who behaves exactly according to our most cynical expectations of someone in power, it just kind of goes hand in hand with that. And the reason I focus on comedy is because there really has been over the past few years a rise in terms of how news is mediated, how we consume it. And in some part, this is because media has taken a bit of a nosedive. I think we're sort of finding our way back, actually, which we can. That's another conversation.
Where are we finding ourselves back?
We'll come back to that. But in terms of the comedy, there's been a rise in like late night comedy shows, and what's been heartening to see is where when we had like Tina Fey doing Sarah Palin, right? it was amazing because she literally almost took verbatim quotes from Sarah Palin and then like, you know, clipped on some bangs, and it was like, boom, satire. But then it started to get weirder and weirder when it was like, okay, now Sarah Palin's coming on the show.
Yeah.
Which, you know, Tina Fey talked about later and was like, I did not want that to happen.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But I mean, that kind of thing ends up, it becomes a kind of like tacit support of this
co-signing,
and it's really messed up. Whereas, you know, I think there is comedy now, especially in this like more second generation of shows, like Trevor Noah, Samantha Bee, John Oliver. Like we're seeing, I think, a little bit more of a shift towards that truth telling, and also to that like not cynical laughing it off, but expressing outrage. And sometimes, and this is my favorite, when it's like encouraging people to do things, even if it's through a satirical, funny way of doing it. I mean, it was kind of brilliant when, on the Colbert Report, when he had the guy come on and like, he created a super PAC. Yeah. I don't know if you guys remember that. Yeah. And it was like, oh, you are, through your satirical show, you were exposing how gross it is to do, or how easy it is to do something so gross.
Yeah.
But I felt like that was few and far between that kind of contextualized comedy, and it's happening more and more now. But I feel like I would really love everyone to be like thinking about that when they're seeing comedy, because I think it really does do different things for us and inspire different kinds of energy.
Yeah, I think the words you might have used, I don't know if these are exact words, but is it numbing us, or is it actually instigating us or agitating us?
Yeah.
Don't you think? I feel like that's the difference. It's like, what is the art doing? Is it, here's the thing. Sometimes I like a good escapist movie at the old Cineplex.
The old
Cineplex. But I think it's like, as sort of, this is what sucks, is that we see ourselves as consumers. And in fact, we need to be not that, right? I feel like that's what it really is reminding me of, is that like, to be American is to see ourselves as consumers. That if what we consume and what we buy is who we are, whether it's art or media.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what does it mean for us to be actively engaged and responding to that?
Right, and asking those questions that are often thought of as like dewy-eyed and naive, like what do I think democracy should look like? What does it feel like? What is freedom actually? We kind of discount these questions as being really like, well, I don't know, they're like, that's for kids. But that's so problematic, because I think what's happened is we've started to shift, and I talk in the book about a story, it's a conversation with my friend I think many people can relate to, which was during the primaries before the presidential election. I was having a conversation of Hillary versus Bernie with a friend of mine, and she was like, I am super behind Bernie's policies, but I don't think he's going to win, so I'm going to support Hillary. And this was like the primaries. And she was already, and so I feel like cynicism starts to come into the room when we are sort of thinking of ourselves as the pollsters. We're like, who's the most electable? And that's a question that we should have. It's important to be somewhat practical and pragmatic, but I feel like we've moved so far in that direction, rather than saying, who do I support and why? Yeah. Who's going to fight for, rights for everyone, towards like, actual American promises that have yet to be delivered on in many ways.
So I just want to do a time check to see how much more time we have, because I do want to talk a little bit more about what we can do, because it always feels better when you talk about such big issues,
So we're right at 6. Might be a good time to start with the
Q&A, right? Yeah, maybe we'll do Q&A.
Yeah.
But just a quick, a couple of things that through this book, what has it made you think about in terms of what we need to be doing? I'm not organizing with any group, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I answer the calls, so like make phone calls or text, or you know what I mean? Like there's all that happened after the elections, but what do we do?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to really move towards, and a lot of people are already doing this, moving towards recognizing that like this sort of level of civic engagement, it has to be something that we're doing every day, or like a part of our regular lives. And I think the trick there, I'm not, I don't want to sound like, you just gotta do the work, put your big girl pants on, but kind of do that. But also like, this should be fun, like it's not gonna be fun all the time, but like, we're talking about, there are so many indivisible groups that have started up, and I know many friends of mine are part of them, and like they have formed into social groups, right? They have formed into, and that's what it's going to take, right? We need to have our personal lives.
Organize a group,
or join a group.
That's how it feels, right? Like, okay.
Yeah. But that's the thing, is protest and engagement needs to get a lot more fun.
Yeah.
And there's so many examples of that. There's a book, if you guys need some hope on the concrete tactics and tools, called Beautiful Solutions by a friend of mine, Andrew Boyd, where he's one of the editors. But it just compiles all it, so that hopefully we can start thinking about this as, and also recognizing that these are the stakes, right? This isn't just like, oh, I gotta go do my work. It's like, do you want healthcare?
Yeah.
Do you want to be able to retire? I do. I don't know how I'm going to, be able to do that legitimately. And I feel like if we can start to bridge that gap of recognizing that the political realm is where we need to be seeking remedy. Yeah. That all of these GoFundMes for people in our lives who have cancer, I mean, it's very lovely that there's this community, but it's so messed up that we are relying on each other in this way because we need just basic, and in such a rich country, the fact that this is the reality is obscene.
Yeah. Word. They're Kaniela-ing in Hawaii. They need help making phone calls to turn people out. If that's something you want to do. Kaniela.
Nice.
Yeah.
Kaniela.
So do you have any questions? Let's give a round of applause for
It's really hot. Maybe it's hot down there too.
Yeah. So any questions? I'll try to facilitate.
I just have a quick recommendation. Bill Maher, Real Time, new episode began last night. They discussed practically everything you have been discussing, meaning that we are so distracted by his tweets that the Koch brothers or the Koch brothers are actually...
It's Koch brothers, but I like calling them Koch brothers.
They're focused on actually changing the Constitution.
Yeah. So basically, he's trying to say, "Oh, you're getting distracted by Trump's nuttiness." Yeah. Well, real things are happening. Yeah. I mean,
I have two things to say about that. I have more than two things. I would say anything that Trump is doing, especially if it's a policy or something that is impacting people and is going to lead to people suffering, it's never a distraction. Yeah. And I'm not saying that that's what you're saying, but I feel like that argument is often used in that context, and it needs to stop, because that is the height of cynicism. And again, it builds into that notion that these things are at odds, that we can't pay attention to what this lunatic is doing in the White House and mobilize and organize on multiple issues. So the notion that those two things are at odds, again, absurd.
I think it's because we need to connect the idea of how organizing works, which is a narrative, and the stories we tell about ourselves actually can connect all of us together so that we can move, right? So that we can act. And so, people are going to fulfill different roles, right? There's going to be people who are going to mind the Twitter. They're going to pay attention to the Twitter, talk back, organize around the Twitter. And then there's going to be the people who are probably better served for, on the ground kind of organizing. So I think we can have both.
Totally. Yeah, and I mean, I want to stress that, like, when we're talking about Trump promoting racism, or Trump, pushing forward a policy that's going to have real repercussions for people, we need to be paying attention. When it comes to him misspelling things on Twitter, just proving the fact that he's not an intelligent person, that can be distracting if we're just focusing on that, and it's unnecessary, because it's like, we already know. We know that, like, let's move on. Let's, energy needs to be, we have limited energy.
Yeah. Back there?
So thank you again. This is awesome. I think within the context of a true democracy, the marginalized majority would absolutely be able to accomplish all these wonderful things that we're talking about. But I'm curious what your response is to the legacy structures that have been established to disenfranchise that same majority, vis-a-vis the Senate, for example, where votes matter more in Midwestern states that have a larger white population, things like that.
Totally.
How do you respond when we may not necessarily feel that changed?
Yeah, so the question is essentially, you know, the notion that the marginalized majority can have power is great if we sort of assume that America is this meritocracy, is this egalitarian place, but what about all this institutional and infrastructural, you know, baked-in crap? And gerrymandering comes to mind. You know, we're talking about a constant assault and attack on the voices of the marginalized. I guess my response would be twofold. One is that I think if more people are aware of these assaults and how direct and obvious they are, like this move to disenfranchise voters, it's just so transparent. I think that is a big part of the problem, is the awareness, because it's hopefully going to then translate into mobilizing and demanding that our local representatives and above take action and resist this. The other piece of it is something that I just left my mind.
It happened to me. It happens to me.
Yeah. Ooh. No.
It'll come back.
Yeah, it'll probably come back. Do you have things to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, you know, we have to row this boat while we're patching it up, like while we're fixing it, right? So I feel like that's what we have to hold. You know, on the one hand, yes, you know, voting rights has been gutted. The two-party system is still not working for us. You know, there's so many things structurally, and let's work on that. But also, real life is happening, right? So I think we can do both.
I just remembered what it was.
Yes.
Okay, so during Occupy Wall Street, I was working on a article where I was exploring the feasibility of like a massive labor strike and like what's the feasibility of it, what's the legality of it. So I called up this longtime labor lawyer who had been, you know, union rep and worked in that field for decades. And I was like, okay, so like, is this legal? Like, can this work? You know, because of course, like, if a bunch of people, like, are they going to risk being fired? Like, what's the recourse? And I felt like he was willfully not responding to my question. We kept going around in circles, and he was like, basically what he was trying to say was that law follows power.
Yeah.
And I mean that both obviously in terms of like, if it's a handful of extremists who are pushing the terms of the conversation, it's going to go that way. But that, you know, law is not some sort of inherently egalitarian thing. It's practiced by human beings, and it exists in the system that is already profoundly not, that's already so bigoted, right?
Yeah.
And so what he was saying is like, well, yeah, no, maybe it's not legal now across the board. But if there is a majority of people demanding, if there's a majority of people who are organizing consistently, the law will follow that.
Yeah.
And so I guess that just comes to mind in terms of like, yeah, it's going to be a fight, but if we sort of recognize that our demands, the cross-section of what the many demands that we share, if we recognize that and push forward, law and power will follow.
Yes. Question right there?
Well, yeah, question, comment, but excuse me. I do organizing for a living, so I understand what that is. And as such, I teach the civil rights movement, particularly the Montgomery bus boycott, quite often. Just wanted to throw in there the mix, I think, of talking about how you sustain this, right? Mm-hmm. So the Rosa Parks piece, I'm glad I was heartened to hear you point that out, because it is on the whole part. She was 42 exactly, so, and it studied at the Highlander Institute with Miles Horton and Edie Nixon and others. But the other part of that is that when I teach that and I say, how long did the Montgomery bus boycott last to people? And they say, a week, 2 weeks, a month. It was 383 days.
Yeah, it was like over a year.
So it was over a year.
Yeah.
It was that walking to work, organizing sophisticated carpools. It was built on what labor does, but is on retreat now, but permanent organizing. And Chomsky writes eloquently about that you can throw a punch, and the system is designed to absorb it. It's a rope dynamic, right? I mean, so, and you can throw 3 punches, but The problem with protests and marches is they have to be connected to an ongoing structure.
Yes.
The field of having candidates come out of that, I think, is great, but that was almost an unintended consequence in some ways. No one planned that too, but the idea is what happened. You asked about intersectionality. What's a better word? It's called solidarity, right? It's what Solidarność in Poland was born out of unions and overthrew the Polish government. Like
but I mean,
the Poles are struggling now, so but nonetheless,
but
that's
to be
sustainability, I guess.
Yeah.
But with all due respect, I wouldn't connect solidarity with intersectionality because the history of the labor movement has been extremely racist and anti-woman. So I mean, even though women and people of color have also organized in labor. Does that make sense? So I just, I get it. We're not going to go into an argument right now, but I just want to throw that out there that, I appreciate you giving us more
I just want to have like a
information.
30-second kind of response. It's just that we have to reclaim some of those words, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Totally. Like if we want to say solidarity, there's a thing about here. I don't mean to this sort of be it needing to be a back and forth, but there is something about we need to create a culture that is accessible. And to me, we need to figure out what the words mean, why they're loaded, and if we need to in fact, use new words. So if we want to say solidarity, sometimes labor movement words. Sometimes I don't use it because people don't understand it. And I think if anything, what I'm getting from your book is we are the majority, and we need to figure out what narratives we need to create in order to tell ourselves that story that we are the majority.
Right, and to reinstill them with the appropriate meaning, so that so that the people who have been historically marginalized recognize themselves, can make common cause with those concepts that have been not that warm and welcoming historically.
Because I'll be honest, I left the labor movement. This is what if you hear any anger coming from what I'm saying, is because I was
because she's an angry woman.
I am. But because, me and my friends who were in our 20s, hotshot directors of an 85,000 member union, we all left within a year because we did not feel that the leadership was truly fulfilling what they thought they were trying to do, which is to change and adjust to the realities of the labor market. Right, and of power. And as you know, we have still been degrading in our union membership in the percentage of the workforce. So, my anger is not directed toward you in particular, but it's just in general, there is a huge disconnect between those who are on the left, who are still holding whatever the left institutions of powers are, to the people that we are dealing with right now, which is people like you and me, right? So anyway, I just want to kind of throw that out there.
Well, it's important to unpack what we mean by solidarity. It's not it's a powerful word, but it doesn't inherently speak to it's not doing the same work as when you say intersectionality.
Sometimes it depends.
Yeah.
You're saying
no. To your point about expressive protest and making things more fun and social and interesting in that way. There was a great New York Times Daily this week about the ACLU and about comparing them to the NRA and taking a lead from the NRA's platform, because the NRA, from the outside, looks like a fear-mongering group. From the inside, they make narrative pieces to make it feel fun to be part of the NRA. And the ACLU is saying, well, we got to modify, we got to make it fun.
Yeah.
We got to make it social to make people want to just enjoy being part of this action.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's such a light bulb moment.
So she was bringing up that historically something like the NRA, there's from the outside looks like fear-mongering institution, but internally they're creating these really powerful narratives and making it fun to be engaged and a part of it. So an organization like the ACLU, these progressive organizations, we need to recognize that strong storytelling and fun and connectivity and focusing on social connections and that kind of important thread work, it's vital. It's vital to sustaining movements.
Culture and art is important.
Yes.
I know. I mean, do you see, when I think about the NRA, I think about these viral photos of really petite blonde women who are wearing tight clothing and have a gun in their waistband.
Or their purse.
And it's nothing gets between me and my gun. I don't know whatever she's saying.
Yeah.
And then of course, logic, inevitably on the people who don't like it are look at, she's such a clown. And then the people who care about, guns, they're like, she's awesome. Like, but that's what it is, right? That's like part of the NRA culture is to be like, I'm a lady and I can make a pink gun. You know, and it was. They sell pink guns. Like that's culture. That's like art and culture and design
and
they
tell stories about growing up shooting with your grandfather.
Growing up shooting with your grandfather. No, totally. Right. So we need to figure out what that is for us if we're on the marginalized majority side. Right?
Yeah. No, I think we're doing it. We just also people in I think people who are heads of these organizations need to be, you know, being more mindful of that. Yeah. Also, and inviting the right people in to tell the stories.
I think so. Hire me. I have some other friends that you should hire as well.
Yeah, I actually, I you know, a few colleagues in my colleagues of mine and I, right after the election, started an organization called Speech Act, which focuses on teaching storytelling and narrative to social justice organizations and nonprofits. And this is not new. There are other organizations that have been doing this kind of work, but we need more of it, right? Because a lot of times, especially when we've been working in the trenches for so long, again, we burn out. Yes. Or we're just so tired of kind of reiterating the mission, or we're already so bought in that we forget the stories. We forget the reason, the emotional, evocative reasons behind why we're here and why it matters so much for us to spread our stories, to connect us, right? Like the brains were already out there. We just need to recognize ourselves as part of this broader collective, as a political force to be reckoned with. I think the left and progressives right now, and the soon-to-be progressives that just don't know it yet. We've historically kind of been on the sidelines. What do I mean by that? Not on the sidelines as in not protesting, not engaging, but kind of this sense that we don't have power. Yeah. This historical sense that because we have been historically so disenfranchised that we sort of come to the table sometimes, I think, already counting ourselves out, and it's just sort of this knee-jerk reaction that I think we can do better.
Yeah. Up here and then over here.
Well, I'm having discussions with my friends on Facebook now. There's this status quo Democrat who doesn't want any movement, who's real happy. And I was willing to play that game because I thought the most radical act I could do was elect a woman president. Yeah. But the momentum is with socialism right now. Yeah. And the college kids, I'm talking to kids out of Harvard right now, nobody on these elite campuses is thinking anything but socialism right now. Yeah. And so we're having this discussion, because I'm a little bit older than you guys, about the soccer moms and how the soccer mom vote, a power female vote, how that's modulating. And now we've got this divisiveness in the party. Some of my friends call it the yoga vote. Mm-hmm. I call it wine mom, right? Who are not willing to give up their democratic comforts, who are still on Wall Street, doing Wall Street the way Wall Street, was built to run, and who aren't thinking with the momentum of some of these elections protests and some of these, and also, part of this divisiveness is when you get into the machine, and now Cortez is being labeled as anti-Semitic, okay, out of nowhere. And I go to the gym today, and some guy comes up and says, "Oh no, she's anti-Semitic." Because the machine has taken over.
Yeah. So basically, kind of, she's recognizing and pointing out that there's something of a shift, or this question of what's happening right now, where maybe we a lot of us were at this point where we thought, well, voting for a female president is the most radical act, to like, well, what are we seeing now? It seems like there's more the support for like socialism, and that as a movement rather than this more establishment Democratic Party, and also touching on these different voting contingents like the soccer moms, and who are they now? I think what we're seeing is the obvious tension that comes out of the realization that the establishment Democratic Party, while obviously quite different from the Republican Party, still, when you look at the party platform, is so far right of what the majority of Americans want. So it's just a problem. It's a real problem. And so the Democratic Party needs to step up like fast. Because, I think we're seeing that divide happening now more and more.
Yeah, what's, where this whole talk, right, is basically about reframing where the majority's interests are. And what we're saying is we need to start talking about how Democrats and Republicans are actually center-right reside there. And there is no oppositional, exactly. And so I think that the rise of the sort of democratic socialist movements, I know in LA it's been a growing chapter, the DSA. And then Alexandria, I know, and the fact that the question of Palestine always gets potential elected officials in trouble, who might come from a different background, because it's like the weird third rail, like you can't say anything about supporting Palestinian people's human rights without being called
an anti-Semite.
An anti-Semite. Yeah. I mean, it just goes from 0 to 60 on that, So that's just really unfortunate. And we just have so much work to do. I have prejudices around socialists.
Okay, why?
Even though I consider myself probably a democratic socialist.
Why?
It's usually just white dudes that really make me feel alienated and reinforce the patriarchy. I mean, I'm not just like...
I hear you there. That's why you vote for Sanders.
Yeah, some progressives didn't vote for Sanders because of that, So it's just hard. I voted for Sanders. I mean, what are we doing, you guys? We got to figure this out, So I feel like we need to address these things, and otherwise, I mean, the most logical people who should be all together and on each other's sides, we are being divided because we've been told to be divided, and so this is part of the undoing.
Totally. And I mean, I think a lot about coming of age and being reluctant to identify as a feminist. I grew up in the South, and there was a lot of being apolitical, being colorblind, being the sort of that's the polite and most neutral and most welcoming kind of thing that you could be. And it took, it just takes recognizing that feminism exists and the Black Lives Matter movement exists, because what is happening is that we live in a country in which if you are a woman, if you are Black, if you are a minority, you live in a radically different country. You are paid differently. You have a shorter lifespan. Your access to resources. I mean, so in my mind, with such fundamental things that are still so apparently wrong and that need to be addressed, people just need, people in power, people who are running for office, they need to be addressing these core things. Otherwise, no vote. There's just such fundamental things that need to happen.
So much to do right here.
Hi, thanks for being here. I was just interested in your what both of you brought up about burnout, and particularly something I think about a lot is working within institutions to create change versus outside them. And I know both are necessary, and then you have to figure out where your role is. But how have you how did you, for example, decide to quit the labor union? Or how have you decided I don't know, a lot of times I feel the angry brown woman who everyone's I'm on a the college campus right now, and I'm hey, I'm really mad all the time. And everyone's shut up. So I'm just confused. How do you decide where your role is, or how not to feel hopeless?
What makes you not feel hopeless? You sort of already referred to it is both and I talk in the book about immediately after the election there was a group of folks who came together. Some of us knew each other, but a lot of us were strangers to each other, and we all wanted to take part in some really groundbreaking action that would be easily replicable across the country, kind of like Occupy Wall Street, that was no to this election, no to these, just a big no. And there was so much fervor and energy, and really seasoned activists who were part of the WTO protests, who were part of Occupy Wall Street, and all of us were down. Short of a few people, we were ready to be arrested. We had those conversations, and I talk about how it fell apart. So basically, what happened is while we all had such energy, there emerged this divide. We were on board for this action, but when it came time to come up with our platform statement, all of these questions about the words we were willing to use, democracy, America, American, using the American flag, for instance, there were such spirited divides, right? And in the end, we decided to part ways. And I talk about that for a variety of reasons, but one of which is, while it was disappointing, there have been offshoots, and a bunch of different people have now taken part in different actions. and they do have different approaches, and that's okay, and it's still moving us forward. But also, for me, it was a formative moment because, well, first of all, so it's not a failure, right?
Yeah.
Like what on the surface might look like a failure, it's not. But then also, I feel like we really need to be willing, from my perspective, be willing to take back the meaning of those words and fight for them.
Like patriotism.
Yeah.
I agree.
And
I think that's very important.
It's so uncomfortable. And when those arguments that we were having, a lot of times I feel like asking, like, what does it mean when we say democracy? What does it mean when we say American? The fracturing that was going on was legitimate, right? It's like those words have been wielded, in ways against so many people in a way that, like, they're too corrupted. And I respect that opinion. I think there's a lot of validity to it. But I don't, from my standpoint, if we don't try to read on those terms, we already know what happens. A handful of extremists takes them over and tries to use them as their emblems.
Right, to say you're an American.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I in terms of addressing burnout, I mean, I burnt out mostly because, I was on my own little journey of figuring out what made me happy. And, I had a lot of responsibility in a very politically fractious, is that a word?
Yeah.
Environment of the labor union. It's a very big, powerful labor union. And it just didn't feel like it was a place for me anymore because I didn't look up to the people that were above me anymore. I was a director at the end. So, so that's what happened. And there was a part of me that thought, I always knew from being a high school student government nerd that it would be a foregone conclusion that I work in politics in some capacity. It wasn't until college activism that I realized what my politics were, right? And then I was like, okay, then I'm gonna go to grad school and I'm gonna work at something, and it ended up being the labor movement, right? But it in my head, that was the path that was laid out in front of me, that was the natural path that most people assume, right? Where you become a political professional. And I think what was scary but exciting was if I were to drop doing that kind of work, but honor the more creative side of my skills, which is not to say I don't use my business skills at all or organizing skills. I use my organizing skills all the time in what I do now, which is why I have a career. But I wanted to honor my creativity more. And now I would say in the spirit of not calling things failures, that as much as sometimes I'm like, I wish I started doing comedy in college, like the way a lot of people are like, I've always been a comedy nerd. I wish I did that because maybe I would have gotten farther with my craft. But I wouldn't be who I am without having had that experience of working in the trenches in the labor movement, door knocking, all of it, all the rhetoric that we did. It all feeds into my understanding of the world, and then therefore my role in the skills I have in trying to talk back at it, right? As a comedian, or as a convener, or a storyteller, or an organizer of artists, essentially now is what I do. So,
that journey of finding your voice.
Yes.
And when I'm talking about this group and the way we split, but then we're doing different actions, it's like I had to travel that journey of feeling like it was a failure at first, and then recognizing that, what happened was this organic gravitating towards each other, the people who are like, yes, this is how I see this too, let's move forward with our action, which isn't in opposition really to these other groups also moving forward and doing necessary and vital work, and I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to do the most good, right? I need to be doing the thing that is the most effective, the most functional right now, and obviously being practical and thinking about having real impact is important, but I think we discount the importance of where is this sustainable? Yeah. Where am I going to be able to feel like my voice has room and space, and where am I going to be recharged and refueled? And that said, obviously you need to be able to step away sometimes and read a trashy book, watch trashy TV, go walk in the park, because you just can't keep doing this stuff 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
But there are ways in which you can be part of protest and part of change that still are refueling you. And so to just be aware of emotionally what's taking too much from you, I think is really healthy.
Yeah.
I think we have time for maybe just one more, and then yeah.
So you talked about the protagonist that you read as a young woman, young girl. Who are your authors and protagonists that you look to today?
oh man, who are the protagonists and authors that I look to today? Oh man, this is rough because there are so many, and also I'm on the spot. So
you recommended a couple books earlier.
Yeah, yes. Thank you.
I listen sometimes.
So L.A. Kaufman's Direct Action is fantastic in terms of she really digs into the history of protest movements. And what I was talking about in terms of surfacing the real history and instrumental actors who tend to go totally unnoticed or unremarked on, and she really unpacks that. And Steve Phillips's Brown is the New White is obviously great. I'm also an avid fiction reader, so Zadie Smith is fantastic. What else have I been reading lately? I don't know. We can talk about. I don't want to Yes, we should talk books.
So many books. So many books.
So many. Yeah.
Yeah, do you need to close out any particular way other than get a book?
Wait, White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, which just came out. I just started reading it. It's so good. Yeah. All right.
How do we do this book signing thing?
Well, I think if you want to buy.
Yay! Thank you for the thoughtful questions.
Yeah, that was great.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget, you can listen to this and all of our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.